For years, the Muslim Waqf has claimed the Temple Mount was always Muslim property, but a pamphlet put out by the same Waqf in 1925 was recently discovered, telling a very different story. Shalom to Zev Orenstein, a former Arutz Sheva radio host, and the man who found the pamphlet.
Shalom.
So tell us, what exactly is it that you found?
The Waqf, the Muslim Religious Trust, in the past, going back to the 1920s and 30s, and even in the last few decades, has put out every couple of years what they call a brief guide to the Haram al-Sharif, what we know as Har HaBayit, or the Temple Mount. And what is interesting is that in the early editions, for instance, in the editions of 1925 and 1930, it actually makes clear reference to the fact that the sanctity of the Temple Mount comes from the fact that this is where the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple of Solomon, of Shlomo, stood. And they also make reference to David HaMelech having purchased this area and brought sacrifices, which is very interesting. Not that there's any question that that's the case, but that in the last decade or so, there's been a phenomenon known as temple denial, which has been rampant in the Islamic world, which denies any existence whatsoever of any temple standing on the Temple Mount or any Jewish connection to Jerusalem. And we see here, going back to their very own guide to the Temple Mount, going back to 1925 and 1930, the fact that they themselves attest the sanctity of the site going back to Jewish history, to the Beit HaMikdash.
This seems like a reversal of years of Muslim claims. What kind of impact do you think this will have, first and foremost, on the Muslim public?
I don't think it'll have any impact on the Muslim public. I think that those who have manipulated truth to serve political and nationalist agendas will find a way to explain this one away as well. I don't think the impact is so much on the Muslim world. I think the potential impact could be much greater on the Jewish world as well as the general public. For instance, if one goes back to Camp David in 2000, with Arafat saying to Bill Clinton, President of the United States at the time, that there were never any temples that existed on the Temple Mount, and therefore the Jews should have no rights over that area. And imagine if people knew of this document back then in Camp David, that they could have said, well, what about this thing that the Muslim Waqf put out yourself in 1925 and 1930, explicitly saying that there was the temples that stood there. I think that there are many Jews in the world who hear the propaganda that goes out from the Islamic world, and they don't understand that there are people who manipulate history, who lie about history, and who believe them when they might say something about there never being any temples, there's no proof of any temples. And I think that this document could maybe help to reach out to those people.
So are you saying actually that Jews are more affected by Muslim PR than by actual history?
I think it's not just swayed by Muslim propaganda. I think that most people, Jews, non-Jews in general, are ignorant of history. And also, I think people generally try to give people the benefit of the doubt that if someone says something, you tend to believe them unless you have reason not to. So if there are lots of, quote-unquote respected figures coming out saying, there's no proof of any temple standing on the Temple Mount, well, there must be some truth to it. Otherwise, how could they go around saying it? And since most people are not aware of their history, Jewish history or otherwise, it leaves them vulnerable to be taken in by such, falsehoods and lies. So I think that this type of document, if it gets enough exposure, could help to educate the masses and let them know that, in fact, there is Jewish history in Jerusalem, particularly on the Temple Mount where the temple stood, and that I think there's a lesson here, which is that we need to know our own history. We can't be ignorant of our history, because there are those out there who will manipulate our ignorance and lack of knowledge for political gains and really to work towards the destruction of the Jewish nation.
How did you actually come across this pamphlet?
Well, I had actually learned about this pamphlet first in Dory Gold's book, The Fight for Jerusalem, which came out a few years ago. And ever since then, I've been curious about this document, trying to find the actual text. In Dory Gold's book, he has one page scanned in there. So ever since then, I've been curious, trying to find it. And then I happened to come across on the internet on one blog, I think it was called Bible Places blog, where they actually made reference to it, and someone had scanned it in. And, sure enough, there it was, the edition from 1925. And subsequently, I've actually found that if you go to old bookstores on the internet, you could actually buy a physical copy for not too much money. So it's actually out there. You just need to know where to look for it.
Zev, thank you so much for joining us and bringing this interesting pamphlet to light.
My pleasure.